Today we'll continue our talk on Lacan's thinking. I don't remember exactly what I did say, but as far as I remember, we have talked about Lacan's initial starting point as the mirror stage where imago gets its form in a fantastic form, right? And continues to hunt actually the individual by creating a gap between the symbolic into which the individual in the form of a symbolic subject had been introduced in life through the agency of the interesting father in psychoanalytical terms, but in linguistic terms through the agency of the letter, harf. Do you have any questions with regard to all these discussions? The symbolic, the literalization of the subject, or through the acquisition of the language, transformation of the human from animal to social being, or being human, actually, in the real sense of the term, etc. Do you have any questions? Yeah, are you readily convinced with this argument? Or do you have questions, suspicions, perhaps some points of critique and so on? Or it simply does not interest you? No, who cares? Some shitty body comes along and says some stupid bullshit. Okay? So why do we care about it? Why do we think about it? Okay, let's start with this question. Why should we, or why I bring this to your attention? What the fuck are we gonna do with it? Huh? Do you have any idea? We are not going to do anything with it. No? Is that the situation? What's a theory for, anyway? Just to learn some fundamental claims, stupid claims, try to memorize them in the exam to be able to get a passing grade, and then forget about them. Do you think the situation is really so? Okay, say something. Silence is the worst. So let me repeat my question then. Do you have anything to ask about the discussions I've tried to present to you? Okay. Then tell me about your own self. How do you feel today? Without saying anything, just okay, if there will be no response, I will not going to continue. Please.
Maybe the unequal tension between the inside and the outside, this issue matrix, like imago and society, imago, or the tension between imago and the ego idea, inside and outside. This tension or this conflict is unresolved.
Okay, that's one of the interesting questions in Lacan theorizing. But you know, first of all, okay, this gives me a beautiful thread to follow. First of all, you should understand that Lacan was a psychoanalyst. So the primary aim of psychoanalysis, as it has any function apart from generating knowledge, you know, is to, quote unquote, cure some certain disturbances, usually called, thought to be related with the human psyche, okay? Some certain disturbances in an individual's life. These disturbances are usually referred as symptoms, okay? So, yeah, as an individual suffering from certain symptoms, you want to get rid of them, okay? You want to get rid of them, and you seek help for this, okay? For such kind of disturbances, you can seek help from a psychiatrist, for instance. I don't know how the psychologists are doing nowadays, but perhaps it could be a good idea to go to and apply to a psychologist as well. So, or a psychoanalyst, okay? Each having a different approach in dealing with your problem, okay, whatever it is. So Lacan was one of the psychoanalysts trying to call psychoanalysis to a return back to the Freudian basic teachings, etc., etc. And for that regard, however, he had to tackle with several problems. Okay, first of all, one should understand that in the treatment of the psychic or neurotic, I don't know the specific terminology of that language, okay, a symptom, okay, a symptom, one starts asking how I gonna deal with it, okay? And to be able to deal with it, one has to have an answer with regard to what is it. Okay. You know, we sociologists deal, when I, for instance, ask you to problematize about the social, what you come up mostly is enumeration of certain social problems, okay? Problematizing is something different. Well, okay, enumeration of certain social problems. Therefore, you sociologists, in your mind, thinking that you are as well dealing with certain symptoms from which society suffers, you know. You are here putting yourselves, your own efforts to correct them, okay? Say, for instance, when you draw attention to gender inequality or violence against women, etc., etc., or children's sexual harassment, etc. You are pointing to those problems, you know, and actually deep in your heart, you are willing to come up with a certain solution or to come up with something that would be able to contribute to the solution of this problem, okay? So actually it's in that way. The psychoanalyst, on the one hand, tries to deal with the symptom this time specific to a certain patient, certain individual human being, okay? It is within this context such theories began to develop. Freud, for instance, having not so much concern with the problems, intricate problems of linguistics, etc., okay, suggested, as you know, a certain human being, okay, consisted of a bodily part as well as a psychic part. You know, the psychic had been distinguished into 2 or sometimes 3 portions, sometimes whatever, okay? He was trying to bring up with a certain answer that will help him to solve the problems that his patients were suffering, okay? And the bodily part, okay? Bodily part interpreted within the psychic framework as the location of the id, you know, where our animal drives and instincts were hidden from our state of awareness, so that we do not know much about them, etc. Okay, so to be able to tackle, and Freud also introduced the effect of the external social onto the individual human psyche, okay, in the form of the formation of the superego from a portion of the id, okay, as well. And the development of a certain ego then to be able to balance these conflicting forces emanating from it as well as coming from the outside society, the pressure of father, etc. Okay, fine. This was the Freudian model, finally culminating in the recognition of the existence forces in the form of the society, as well as recognition of the internal biological forces pertaining to the human nature, human existence. Okay, but you know, this analysis actually, how can I put it, is an open sort of analysis. Okay. And it gives us such a picture, you know, such a picture. Here, for instance, we consciously, in our state of awareness, deal with the forces coming from our internality, a deep, but of course limited, since we are mortals and having bodies, okay, dark place, okay, and a intermediary formation in the human psyche, and the outside. Okay, so pressures both coming from inside and outside. Okay, in the middle, trying to get a certain balance. Okay, well here, as you can see, the outside, inside model still persists. Okay. By just looking at this model, you can still claim that you have your individual, personal, innermost being as your own property. Okay, so you can still claim that you are a unique individual human being, perhaps a unique creation of God, perhaps a unique formation in nature. Okay, but completely unique, and in the complete possession of its own self. Okay. But the problem with the discussions concerning subjectivity, increasingly, starting with structuralism and the other waypoints, increasingly pointing towards the direction that actually there was no subject. Even Kant, almost 200 years ago, had already told that what you call subject is nothing than a phenomenal production of the workings of our own consciousness. And that phenomenal production may not correspond or does not have anything to do with what you may think of as your own real self. Okay? So this question concerns us sociologists from the simple point of the fact that we usually see society, even though we may interpret the concept of society in this or that way, we practically see society as an agglomerate of individuals. Why? Simply because what we see are the individual human beings. Okay? Even though here in this class I would insist you that the subject matter of sociology has nothing to do with these individuals. Okay? You're still going to go out there and ask the individuals as if they are the possessors of their reality and their truth. Okay? Ask the individuals what they think about these or those things. Okay? So this shows that, the analysis shows that if there is no such subject, it proves that this whole procedure is something misleading. Okay? First of all. So one has to be careful. Okay? One has to, or in other words, theory is not that innocent thing that stays there where you put it. Okay? It actively intervenes into the formation of what you may call real. Okay? Actually, it forms the real and presents the real into a form to you in an understandable fashion. Okay? Actual theory, the whole meaning of theory is this. Otherwise, it's not a complexity of ideas, etc., related with each other in a logical manner. No, no. It is actually the activity of theorizing is the presentation of what we think real is. Okay? Nothing else. Find that if the proposition is correct, then that subject is something constructed. Okay, so it turns out to be having an ultimate importance for us sociologists too, to investigate how this construction had been achieved. Okay, how what we call a particular subject, or what we may interpret a particular gestalt of human form in a particular society in its certain period of history, okay, turns out to be the ultimate importance. Why? Simply because actually the real subject matter of sociology are those what we call social relations rather than individuals. And the construction process could possibly be taking place exactly in this what we call the social processes. Okay, so our very subject matter. Okay, the sociology is subject matter. So what are social processes? Of course, one can assume that it is the relations, relationalities, patterned forms of being related of the human biological individuals. Okay? So human interacting with another human, the repetition of certain forms of interaction, okay? Assuming a form of pattern, actually, pattern, and gradually acquiring a quality of thingness. Okay? This is what we call the social institution, you know. When I'm talking about, for instance, social power, when I'm talking about religion, when I'm talking about family, when I'm talking about poverty, etc., or class stratification, etc., they present themselves to our understanding as if they have tangible forms, okay? As if I could reach out there and grasp a class in society. As if I could reach out there and get into my hands the gender, a certain gender, okay, to be analyzed, and so on, okay? So the very thinghood actually lays, the very thinghood of the social phenomena, or what Emil Durkheim would call facts. The very quality of the social phenomena being or presented as a fact is that it has an effect, right? So this is what we are investigating, and the effect of being a subject turning out to have an absolute importance in studying these relationships. That's why we concern ourselves with the problem of the constitution of the subject. Okay? And problem of understanding, or coming closer to understand what we mean by subject. Okay, then this model turns out to be increasingly dissatisfactory for our needs. Simply because it presupposes the pre-given existence of the entity, that entity which we exactly now claim that is not pre-given but rather constructed under the pressure of the processes. Okay? So, the first stage, according to that somebody, okay, the first stage this is one part of this story, but don't forget, this is the psychoanalytic form of the story. Now, about a few moments later, I'm going to start to tell the same story from the point of view of the linguistics, okay? And you'll find out that, things were quite different than you might have thought about them up until, okay? Okay, then to be able to break out this given character of the entity that we call as human subject, okay, first of all, what needs to be done is to get away with the given character of that split, okay, that split which separates the inside from the outside, okay. Actually, I don't know if you have read the article I assigned to you today. What was the title of the article? Of structure as a mixing of an otherness prerequisite to any subject, whatever. It's a it has a very beautiful title, actually. And this article, actually, an address at a conference, is a very important article, not only because it contains some very important claims of the Lacanian theory, but as well in regard to its impact that it created in that famous meeting in 1966 called the Structuralist Controversy, okay, where Derrida and other preeminent structuralists and thinkers, sociologists, linguists, etc., took stage as well. Okay, so I recommend that book. That book which I taken this article or address of Lacan from. Okay, it's called The Structural Controversy, and you can find it easily in internet. Okay, it has very important, considerable articles, and you will see how hot was the debate in those times. Nowadays, I don't know. We tend to pretend that as if such discussions did never happen, okay? As if there were no such questions raised, as if the life goes on, okay? Of course, one cannot expect that life should stop out of a consequence of a discussion, okay? Of course, one cannot do that. But it's strange to forget completely in the disciplines, in the history of the disciplines, the impact of such discussions as well. Okay. So the psychoanalytical story then starts with the mirror stage, okay? Where that first split, that crucial, decisive split takes place. Why this is decisive? Simply because it constitutes the very possibility of existence. Okay. Okay, let me read a certain quotation from that text by Lacan. Okay, with regard to the a certain notion, you know, to hold something as given, what does it imply?
We don't question its existence.
Yeah, this already has been implied, but it implies more than this. And more important than this, implies that that something stands there in the form of a unity. Okay? I'm talking about that something. Something. Okay? And that something necessarily stands there in the form of a unity. Okay? Now, the problem is to first try to take a look at the source of unity. Okay? Lacan here in this address talks about this unity and says that he had already found, always found, that notion of the unifying unity somehow disturbing. Okay? What does it mean, the unifying unity? We actually had come across with the problem when we were discussing Hegelian approach to Kantian philosophy. You know? Now, Kant had presented us with a unity, as you remember, okay? Consciousness. But as Hegel pointed out, the problem for that consciousness was that since there is nothing that this consciousness is able to recognize as it is other, okay? The consciousness cannot, this consciousness cannot have any notion of unity in it, okay? Simply because for this consciousness, all that is, okay? And no more predicates, okay? In other words, let me put it in these terms, this consciousness cannot know itself as one particular consciousness. This is why Hegel calls this consciousness. Okay? And as you see, as you remember, the constitution of one single consciousness, according to Hegel, can only take place through an encounter with another consciousness. You remember that, right? So, only through this encounter that consciousness comes to understand that it is one consciousness. This particular consciousness, okay? Otherwise, it can even not know itself as consciousness or as world at all. Okay? Therefore, hence, the amalgamation of these two notions in the Hegelian conception of the Geist. The Geist is at the same time the God. The Geist at the same time is the subject, consciousness. The Geist is at the same time the world. Okay? All have been put together and amalgamated and made identical with each other. Okay? In the notion of the Geist. However, at that particular stage of the development of consciousness, you see that that consciousness would necessarily come to know itself as one, start to count, in other words, only in the presence of the two, the other. Okay? Let me read some quotations from Lacan here in this connection. Okay. After mentioning that in mathematics he almost in each and every equation come across with the formulation of n plus 1, you know. And relating this with the notion of unifying unity, which detested him, as he says, okay? He says that maybe we start to think about the unity not through the concept of unifying unity, but rather through the concept of counting unity, okay? Countable unities. Okay, therefore he enters into this formula n plus 1. What we are doing is counting, simple counting. You know, counting is a simple matter. Okay, actually eliminating all the distinctions, as you will say. Okay, here. Okay, I start to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, etc. Each one has been assigned with a number. Okay, and each number considered to be equal to the other number, simply because they are nominal, as you know. Okay. And therefore eliminating the differences among the individuals to which the numbers correspond, so to speak. Okay? So when I count 1, okay, when I add to this original one a second one, 2, okay, actually what I am doing is nothing else than setting the identity of the countables. Huh? This individual with glasses is the same with this other individual with blonde hair. Okay? One is represented by 1, the other one is represented by 2. Huh? Okay? But Lacan says that the most difficult part is to start counting. Okay? To be able to start counting, he says, there will always the second term present. Just as in the example of the Hegelian encounter with the other consciousness. To be able to count one consciousness as 1, the presence of the other consciousness as 2 turns out to be necessary, it means. Okay? And this already implies, in a Lacanian language, the presence of a series, okay, prior to the counting numbers. Okay? So, the prerequisite of counting turns out to be the formation of this series even prior to the possibility of counting. Okay? Prior to the possibility of saying 1, one had already envisaged the series of counting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 7, 8, 9, etc. Okay? Along with the relations with all these consecutive numbers. Okay? Apart from this, he would say one cannot start to count. Okay? Actually, he borrows the solution of this problem, that the presence of the 2 is required to be able to count the original as the 1, okay, from Frege, an expert mathematician, in other words. Okay? So, the claim is not a psychoanalytic, the claim is not simply linguistic, or the claim is neither philosophical nor whatever else. It's a general claim. Okay? To be able to, in other words, again, referring back to the Hegelian claim that one cannot talk about the individual independent or prior antecedent to the social. Okay? So, to be able to talk about the individual, the formation coming into being of the individual, there has to be the society there already, in other words. Okay? In other words, to be able to say 1, okay, you had to have the community, the society of the numbers. In other words, in linguistic terms, the community of the signs, or if you like, in Saussurian terms, the signifying chain itself. Okay? Otherwise, you cannot say 1. Now, what could be the possible consequences of this analysis of numbers, series, etc., with our specific problem here? Okay? That the givenness, the questioning of the givenness, given character of the individual subject. Now, of course, one should be careful about talking the subject simply because, again, perhaps nobody, I'm not sure about it, nobody would claim to deny that, okay, this something, okay, is here. But that this something is an individual, that this something is a human being, let alone saying that this something is subject, is a completely and totally different affair. Okay? And actually, by addressing that something with all these words, these concepts, what we are doing is to decorate that something with certain sets of predicates, characteristics. Okay? So, what are the question, our question then, the question of the sociologist then with regard to this matter, is to determine what concept generates what particular predicates which would be most appropriate for the analysis under question. Or if you like, my research question. Okay? So, the predicates then are not given, okay, but produced through the relations with the others, okay, then studying those relations and trying to establish the appropriate concept, I'll use a Lacanian term in this concept, adequate to those relations, okay, and we will see that such an adequateness will turn out to be impossible, okay, but yet adequate to those relations, or adequate to explain, to gather them under its coverage, in other words, those actual relations. Okay? So, mirror stage then is the original division that enables, that produces the series actually. Okay? Actually, the series itself producing that division. Yeah. Now, we are going to talk about that division, but as a preliminary, let me say that that division is nothing else than the expression of that gap which is the subject itself. Okay? What we call the subject itself. That gap between several things, okay? That gap series, within a series, actually Lacan would call it as punctuation, okay? Or intervention, or if you like, a certain break, point of break, okay? Within an unceasing, seemingly infinite continuity. Somehow, the introduction of the break introducing the series into this, to use an Aristotelian term, unformed matter. Okay? Remember, the Hegelian Geist as well, without breaking apart in itself, okay, cannot acquire a certain determination or whatness, okay? If that breaking apart does not occur, in other words, okay, the Geist, or whatever you like to call it, no important any longer, okay, simply because it does not come into existence. It does not acquire a definite form. It would not have a history, okay? So, it is the precondition of existence. That's why the whole problem is also connected with the problem of existence, okay? If there is no break in this, whatever it is, okay, nothing appears. So this break turns out to be a necessary breach of the continuity, okay? Actually, first giving rise, in the Lacanian case, the formation of something closer to the subject, and setting that division between the internal and the external. According to theory, this is what you refer to yourself when you say your innermost being. Okay? But unfortunately, this relation should necessarily be fantastic, simply because, unfortunately enough, again, and somehow contrary to what Hegel would like to have it, okay, it is not established as a result of a dialectical relationship. Okay? Or in sociological terms, it is not the result of an interaction. Okay? Or rather, it is the result of an interaction, but completely interpreted in another misleading way. Okay? Misleading way from the point of view of an infant capable of conceiving unity as his cognitive faculty, but not establishing that unity. There are several gaps here. Okay? First of all, it is a gap between the mirror image and the self. Mirror image here, it's a gap at the same time between the unity and non-unity, between being and non-being. Okay? The mirror image here, presenting itself in the form of unity, therefore representing the given character of beingness of the child, or if you like, existence of the child on the one hand, while on the other hand, the child lacking all this. Therefore, Lacan explains this relationship as a lack, a gap. Okay? The child does not have. What the child identifies with itself in that stage, it exactly does not have. Okay? I construct myself, I establish the unity identity of one, in other words, okay, in relation to not yet formed two. Okay? The image now replacing my original self. Okay? The image, the first count in the picture, now replacing my original self. Okay? So the two actually, two taking the place of the one. Or if you like, if you start counting by one, actually what you are doing is exactly this. Giving the place of 0 to the 1. Okay? So this is the relationship between a 0 and 1. This is What 0 lacks, if you like, is that n plus 1. Okay? So this was fantastic, and the child later on, with the intervention of the father in the family triangle of the Oedipus complex, has been introduced to this symbolic order. Now, you can feel the relationship between the symbolic order, perhaps, okay, and the social order, you know. Well, you wouldn't say that the symbolic order of language represents exactly what the social order presents. Huh? Are you saying this? First of all, in this interpretation, you are not going to say this simply because none of you would be so stupid enough to say that there is a one-to-one correspondence between language and the real world. Okay? None of you would say this, therefore none of us would cling to this idea, this approach. But the real problem of such a proposition is not this. This difficulty is quite easy to overcome. The real problem in such a proposition is to establish the relationship between language and the real life as a relationship of representation. Okay? Okay. Having acquired my keyword to be able to continue after the break, let's now get our break. Okay?